You paid for me. Now finish it." The rancher did, and then he had a wife. The sun had barely risen over the rolling hills when Jacob, the rancher, stepped out of his small wooden house. The cool morning air brushed against his face, carrying the faint scent of hay and earth. His boots crunched on the gravel as he walked toward the stables, where the horses were already stirring. Life on the ranch was never quiet, but Jacob liked it that way. There was a rhythm to the work, the feeding, the cleaning, the fixing of fences, that gave him a sense of purpose. Every day was different, yet every day demanded his full attention, and that was the way he liked it. Jacob had lived in this small town his entire life. People knew him for his honesty, his hard work, and the quiet strength that seemed to follow him wherever he went. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, people listened. There was a reliability to him, a steadfastness that made him someone the townspeople could trust. Children would wave as he passed by on his horse, and neighbors would nod in greeting. But to most, he seemed untouchable, someone who could face any problem with a calm and steady hand. Yet, that morning, as Jacob saddled his favorite horse, there was an unease in his chest. He couldn't explain it. Not yet. It wasn't about the work or the chores that awaited him. It was about the visit he had planned later that day, one that had been on his mind for weeks. He had heard whispers in town, subtle hints about a family struggling, about a young woman whose future was uncertain. He had never sought out trouble, but something in the way the story reached him made it feel personal. It was as though he had a responsibility to act, whether he wanted to or not. Her name was Clara. She was 19, though she looked younger because of her small frame and the quiet way she carried herself. Her family had fallen on hard times. Her father had passed away unexpectedly, and her mother had been struggling to make ends meet ever since. They owed debts that they could not repay, and the promise of marriage arrangements, a practice still respected in some parts of their community, hung over her like a shadow. The arrangement required a payment that her family simply could not afford. Without it, the young woman's future was uncertain, and in her eyes there was a mix of fear and frustration that tugged at anyone who saw her. When Jacob first met Clara, it was by chance at the small market in town. She was standing by the edge of the crowd, trying to sell a few hand-stitched items to earn some extra money. Her eyes caught his, wide and wary, yet there was a spark of determination there. He had noticed how she stood her ground even as people pushed past her and ignored her calls. Something about her made him pause. Most young women in her situation would have been timid or resigned, but Clara wasn't. She had a fire that he couldn't ignore, a quiet insistence that the world still owed her a fair chance. Their first conversation had been short, almost accidental. Jacob had been buying supplies for the ranch when he overheard her quietly bargaining with a merchant. "Please," she said, her voice steady but soft. "I can pay half now and the rest later." "I promise." It was a small, simple request, but there was something in her tone that struck Jacob, for he could see the weight on her shoulders, the way her small hands clenched the coins she held. He stepped forward, offering a solution that cost him more than it should have, but gave her the chance she desperately needed. That small act set the tone for everything that followed. Clara didn't forget that day. She remembered the kindness in his eyes, the way he didn't lecture her or question her ability to keep her word. She remembered the warmth in his voice, calm and reassuring, as he handed over the payment she lacked. In that moment, she felt both a sense of relief and an awkward awareness that someone had taken responsibility for her future in a way she could not repay. And when she finally said the words that had lingered in her mind for days, they were almost a whisper, filled with both gratitude and a hint of desperation. "You paid for me. Now finish it." Jacob had paused, unsure at first how to respond. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that could not be ignored. It was not a demand, not exactly, but it was a plea for trust, for action, for someone to step in where her family could not. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the hope and fear mingled in her eyes. Breaths. It was a moment that demanded a choice, a moment that would define the rest of their lives. And Jacob, despite his usual caution, felt the pull of responsibility stronger than ever. The days that followed were filled with quiet preparation. Jacob visited her family, understanding the situation in more detail. He saw the worn furniture, the empty cupboards, the bills stacked neatly, but unanswered. He listened as Clara's mother explained how impossible it had been to come up with the payment, her voice trembling not just from fear, but from the weight of pride that made it difficult for her to ask for help. Jacob didn't hesitate. He understood that the act of paying was not about charity alone. It was about dignity, about ensuring that Clara's future was not dictated by circumstance alone. Even as he handled the financial side, Jacob felt the tension in the air. The community was always watching, always ready to judge. A man stepping in to pay for a woman's marriage could be seen as noble, but it could also be misunderstood. Birds. Gossip spread quickly in small towns, and whispers of motives, of personal interest, or of hidden agendas could turn admiration into suspicion. Jacob didn't mind the whispers. He cared more about doing what was right than about what anyone else thought. But he did notice how Clara's eyes would dart around, aware of the silent judgment, yet trusting him enough to let it happen. When the day of the formal agreement arrived, the room was filled with a mix of relief, anxiety, and quiet anticipation. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she held the papers, and Jacob could see the faint blush on her cheeks. He offered a small, reassuring smile, telling her simply, "It's done. We'll finish it." There was no grand declaration, no dramatic speech, just a calm, steady assurance that what needed to be done was done. And in that simple act a bond began to form, one built not on romance yet, but on trust, responsibility, and mutual respect. Breaths. After the meeting, Jacob walked Clara back to her home. The streets were quiet, the sun dipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the town. They walked in silence, each lost in thought. Clara's gratitude was obvious, but it was mixed with something else, curiosity perhaps, or the first flicker of understanding that this man who had stepped in for her was different from anyone she had known. And Jacob, for his part, felt a strange sense of anticipation. He had acted out of duty, out of what he felt was right, but now he wondered what that act would mean for both of them in the days to come. That evening, back at the ranch, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The work continued as usual. The horses needed feeding, the fences required repair, but his mind wandered to Clara, to her family, to the small act that had altered the course of two lives. He knew that paying for the marriage was only the beginning, the real journey. The part that would test his patience, his compassion, and his heart was just beginning. And somewhere deep down he felt a quiet anticipation for what lay ahead. Unsure of the outcome, but certain that he had done the right thing. The night fell softly over the ranch, the sky painted with stars, and Jacob sat on the porch, the cool breeze brushing against his face. He thought about Clara, about the words she had said, about the responsibility he had accepted. "You paid for me. Now finish it." The words echoed in his mind, not as a demand, but as a reminder of the choice he had made. And as he watched the moon rise over the hills, he felt a sense of calm determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever judgments or difficulties came their way, he would see it through. He had stepped into this not because it was easy, but because it was right. And sometimes, doing what is right is the beginning of something far greater than one could ever imagine. After the events at Clara's home, Jacob returned to his ranch with a quiet sense of purpose. The days that followed were filled with work, as always, but his mind often wandered to her and the family he had helped. The payment for the marriage arrangement had been made, but that was only the beginning. There were still details to take care of, promises to keep, and a young woman's future to secure. Jacob had never imagined that a simple act of responsibility would pull him into someone else's life so completely. but now he felt committed to seeing it through, no matter what it took. Jacob began visiting Clara's home more frequently, not as a patron or a stranger, but as someone who wanted to understand the family and the challenges they faced. He could see the exhaustion etched on her mother's face, and the quiet pride in her father's memory that still lingered in the small household. Clara herself had grown more comfortable around him, though she was careful not to show it openly. Her initial shyness gave way to a cautious curiosity, and Jacob noticed how her eyes would follow him with a mixture of respect and a little wonder. He spent hours listening to her stories, learning about the small joys and struggles of her life. She told him about the mornings she spent helping her mother in the kitchen, the afternoons she tried to sell handmade items at the market, and the evenings she wished she had more time to read or dream. Jacob admired her resilience. She was not a girl who complained or begged for help, but someone who worked tirelessly to make the best of her situation. Her words, soft and honest, left a lasting impression on him. One afternoon, Jacob arrived at her home carrying a basket of supplies for the family. Food, fresh bread, and a few household necessities were packed neatly, and he placed them carefully on the kitchen table. Clara watched him from the doorway, her hands clasped nervously in front of her. She was not used to receiving help without strings attached, and yet Jacob gave it freely without question or expectation. "I thought these might help," he said simply, his voice steady and kind. "No need to thank me."
"Just take them," Clara nodded, unsure of what to say. She had wanted to express her gratitude, but words felt inadequate.
Instead, she offered a small, shy smile, and Jacob felt a warmth spread through his chest. That moment, though brief, was significant. It was not about money or obligation anymore. It was about connection, trust, and understanding.
As the days turned into weeks, Jacob and Clara began spending more time together.
He would check on her family, help with small chores, and sometimes share stories of life on the ranch. She listened intently, asking questions about the animals, the crops, and the routines that governed his days.
Jacob found himself enjoying her company more than he expected. Her laughter was light and genuine, and her curiosity reminded him of the simple joys he sometimes overlooked in his own life.
Despite the growing bond, there were challenges. Some neighbors whispered about Jacob's involvement with Clara's family, questioning his motives or suggesting he was meddling in matters that were not his concern. Others admired his integrity but worried about the complications such closeness might bring. Jacob, however, paid little attention to gossip. Breaths. His focus remained on ensuring that Clara's marriage could be completed properly, and that her family was treated with respect and dignity.
One day, Clara hesitated before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper.
Breaths. "Jacob, I don't want to trouble you, but there's something I need to ask." Jacob looked at her, encouraging her to continue. "You're not troubling me, Clara." "Tell me what it is." Her eyes met his, searching for reassurance. "There are still some things, small things, that need to be done for the marriage. My family cannot manage them. I don't know how it will be done without you." Jacob nodded, understanding her concern. He knew that completing the marriage arrangement involved more than just money. There were traditions, documents, and ceremonies that required attention, and the family was struggling to handle them. He felt a sense of duty deepen inside him. Helping her now was no longer just a matter of fairness. It was a commitment he had made to himself, silently, without telling anyone. Burst. "I will take care of it," he said firmly. "Everything will be done properly." "You don't need to worry about a thing." Her relief was palpable. She let out a small sigh and offered him a smile that was both grateful and tentative. Jacob could see a flicker of hope in her eyes, a trust that he had earned through his quiet actions, and steady presence. He realized then that what had begun as a simple responsibility had grown into something more profound, a connection that neither of them fully understood yet. The next few days were filled with preparations. Jacob visited the town offices, arranging paperwork and making sure everything was in order for the formal marriage ceremony. He spoke with community elders, ensuring that all traditions would be respected and that Clara's family would not feel humiliated or out of place. With each step, he demonstrated patience, thoughtfulness, and attention to detail. Clara watched from a distance, learning from his example, and gradually a sense of admiration began to grow. Even as Jacob focused on practical matters, he could not ignore the quiet moments that revealed the human side of their growing relationship. He noticed the way Clara's eyes lit up when she saw a horse galloping freely in the fields, or when she helped feed the younger animals. She had a gentle curiosity, a kindness that extended not just to people but to the world around her. Jacob in turn shared stories of his childhood on the ranch, the lessons he had learned from his father, and the simple joys of a life connected to the land. Each story, each shared moment built a foundation of understanding between them. Yet, despite the closeness developing between them, there was still uncertainty. Clara had lived a life defined by circumstance, and the idea of depending on someone, even someone as kind as Jacob, felt foreign and uncomfortable.
She was used to taking responsibility for herself, and now she found herself in a position where trust was necessary.
At times, she questioned whether it was fair to allow someone else to take charge of her future, and at other times she wondered if she was ready for a life that could be so radically changed by another's actions. Jacob, too, wrestled with his feelings. He had stepped in to help because it was the right thing to do, not because he expected anything in return. But as he spent more time with Clara, he could not deny the growing sense of care he felt for her. He admired her strength, her intelligence, and her courage. There was a spark in her that drew him in, a quiet determination that made him want to be not just a helper, but a partner in her life. Still, he reminded himself to be patient. Trust could not be rushed, and emotions could complicate even the simplest of responsibilities. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Jacob and Clara found themselves sitting on the porch of her home, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. The air was filled with the scent of fresh earth and the soft sound of distant animals settling in for the night. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in thought. Finally, Clara spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Jacob, I don't know how to thank you. You've done more for me than I ever imagined anyone could." Jacob shook his head, a small smile on his face. "You don't need to thank me, Clara. I did what needed to be done."
That's all.
She looked at him, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and a growing admiration.
"It's more than that. You've given me hope, and I think I can believe that life can be better." Jacob felt a warmth in his chest, a quiet satisfaction that went beyond any sense of duty. He realized that helping Clara was not just about finishing what had been started. It was about creating a future, about giving someone the chance to live a life they deserved. And in that moment he understood that this future would not just be hers, but could also be his. The days continued, filled with preparation and planning, but also with small, meaningful moments. Jacob helped Clara and her family organize their home, tended to chores that had gone unattended, and shared quiet conversations that deepened their understanding of each other. Each act, each word, each shared silence strengthened the bond between them. As the wedding day approached, there was a sense of anticipation in the air. Clara's family felt relief and gratitude, while Jacob felt a mixture of responsibility and hope. The act of completing the marriage was no longer just about fulfilling an obligation. It was about building something lasting, something meaningful. But both Jacob and Clara knew, even if they could not fully admit it yet, that their lives were about to change in ways they had never imagined. Through the work, the quiet moments, and the growing trust, part 2 of their story ended on a note of promise. The bond between Jacob and Clara had been tested by responsibility, strengthened by care, and enriched by understanding. They were no longer strangers bound by circumstance. They were two people beginning to discover the possibilities of a life shared, one step at a time. And as the final preparations for the marriage were made, both of them felt the quiet anticipation of something greater waiting just beyond the horizon. The days after the marriage preparations were complete were some of the busiest Jacob had ever experienced. The ceremony itself had passed without a hitch, small and simple, yet filled with meaning and tradition. Clara's family was relieved and grateful, and the townspeople quietly admired Jacob's integrity. But life, as always, demanded work, and Jacob returned to the ranch with a renewed sense of purpose. Despite the long hours and physical labor, his mind often drifted back to Clara. She had moved into the small house on the ranch property, close enough that he could check on her easily, but far enough to give her independence. The arrangement was practical, yet it allowed the two of them to continue learning about each other naturally. Jacob watched her as she adapted to life on the ranch, how she carefully tended the small vegetable garden, helped with feeding the animals, and learned to navigate the routines that defined his days. He admired her determination, but he also noticed moments of hesitation, the small signs of insecurity that came from years of uncertainty and struggle. Clara, for her part, was learning quickly. Life on the ranch was different from what she had known, less structured than her family home, yet more demanding in its own way. She found satisfaction in small victories, like training a stubborn horse or fixing a broken fence, moments where her efforts yielded immediate results. And through it all, she noticed Jacob, not just as the man who had helped her, but as someone who quietly observed, guided, and sometimes gently corrected her. He never criticized her harshly, but his quiet confidence served as a model she wanted to emulate. Their days became a rhythm. Early mornings were for feeding animals and preparing the fields, afternoons for repairs and errands into town, and evenings for small shared tasks like cooking or mending clothes. Each moment, though simple, deepened their understanding of each other. Clara began to see Jacob not just as a helper or protector, but as a man of depth and integrity. She noticed the patience in his movements, the care he gave to every task, and the way he treated both people and animals with respect. Slowly, admiration grew into a quiet affection she had not anticipated. Jacob, too, found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't expected. It was not sudden or dramatic, but subtle. A shared laugh over spilled milk, the way she concentrated on her work with determination, or the gentle honesty in her conversations. He realized that he wanted her happiness, not out of duty, but out of genuine care. Each day, he looked forward to seeing her, listening to her, and sharing the small joys of ranch life. And yet, he remained cautious, understanding that trust and affection could not be rushed. Life, however, was never without its challenges. One afternoon, a sudden storm swept over the ranch. The wind howled and rain poured down in sheets, drenching the fields and threatening the livestock. Jacob and Clara worked tirelessly to secure the animals and protect the crops. Clara, despite her inexperience with such harsh weather, followed Jacob's instructions with determination. They moved together in a synchronized effort, driven by necessity and shared responsibility. By the time the storm passed, they were exhausted, soaked to the bone, and covered in mud. As they stood in the doorway of the barn, catching their breath, Jacob looked at Clara with a mix of admiration and concern. "You handled yourself well," he said. "Most people would have panicked." Clara managed a tired smile. "I had a good teacher," she replied, softly. Her eyes met his, and in that brief moment there was a spark of connection, a recognition that they were beginning to depend on each other, not just for survival, but for companionship. But life on the ranch was not just about storms and work. It was also about community, and the townspeople had begun to notice the changes in Jacob and Clara. Some whispered with curiosity, others with admiration. Yet not all attention was positive. A few skeptical neighbors questioned Clara's presence on the ranch, suggesting that she might be overstepping boundaries or that Jacob's kindness had motives beyond simple generosity. Clara felt the weight of these judgments, and at times doubt crept into her mind. She worried about how others perceived her, about whether she truly belonged, and whether Jacob's care was genuine. Jacob sensed her unease, though she did not always speak of it. One evening, as they sat on the porch after a long day, he addressed it gently. "Clara, you don't need to worry about what others think. I do what I do because it's right, not because of what anyone says. Your place here is earned, and you belong."
Clara nodded, comforted by his words, though still aware of the invisible pressures around her.
She realized that Jacob's support was not limited to the practical aspects of life. It was also emotional. He offered stability, reassurance, and the quiet strength that came from experience and integrity. For the first time in her life, she felt that she could rely on someone without fear of judgment or betrayal. As the weeks turned into months, Jacob and Clara began sharing more personal stories. They spoke of childhood memories, dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. Clara learned about Jacob's upbringing on the ranch, the lessons he had learned from his parents, and the values that guided his life. Jacob learned about Clara's family, her struggles, and the quiet resilience that had carried her through difficult times. Each story, each shared experience, strengthened the bond between them. One afternoon, Clara found herself alone with Jacob in the barn, working on mending a fence. The sun filtered through the wooden slats, casting warm patterns on the floor. She hesitated before speaking, unsure of how to phrase her thoughts.
"Jacob."
"I sometimes wonder if I'll ever be able to repay you," she said quietly. Jacob looked at her, his expression calm and thoughtful. "You don't need to repay me, Clara. What matters is that you live well, that you find happiness, and that you continue to grow." That's enough. But his words were simple, but they carried weight. They revealed not only his generosity, but also his belief in her potential. G realized that his support was not just about finishing the marriage, it was about helping her become the person she could be. Despite their growing closeness, challenges continued to arise. One day, a minor accident occurred while tending to the livestock. A young calf had wandered too close to a fence, and in trying to guide it back, Clara slipped and twisted her ankle. Jacob rushed to her side, helping her to a chair and carefully examining the injury. He tended to her with a mixture of concern and tenderness, making sure she was comfortable and that the injury would heal properly. During that time, Clara felt a profound sense of connection. Jacob's care was patient and thoughtful, not overbearing or controlling. He offered guidance without taking over, allowing her to maintain her dignity while ensuring her safety. In that moment, she realized that their relationship was evolving beyond responsibility or obligation. It was becoming a partnership built on trust, respect, and mutual concern. Evenings on the ranch became moments of reflection and quiet conversation. They would sit together after the work was done, sharing meals, discussing the events of the day, and sometimes simply enjoying the peacefulness of the countryside. The rhythm of ranch life, once so solitary for Jacob, now included Clara in ways that felt natural and comforting. They laughed together, shared small frustrations, and celebrated little successes. Each day brought a deeper understanding of one another, a bond that grew steadily and without force. As time passed, the townspeople's curiosity evolved into acceptance. The initial whispers and judgments faded, replaced by respect for the way Jacob and Clara handled their lives together. They were seen as a couple grounded in responsibility, honesty, and hard work, a partnership that was admired rather than questioned. Clara, who had once worried about fitting in, began to feel a sense of belonging she had never known before. She was no longer just the young woman whose marriage had been arranged. She was a valued member of the ranch, a companion, and someone who was slowly discovering her own place in the world. Jacob noticed the change in her demeanor as well. Her confidence grew, not in a flashy or arrogant way, but in the quiet assurance that came from mastering tasks, learning new skills, and being part of something larger than herself. He admired her resilience and intelligence, and he felt a deepening affection that went beyond the duty he had initially undertaken. It was a love that had grown slowly, nurtured by shared experiences, challenges, and mutual respect. One evening, as they watched the sunset together from the porch, Clara spoke softly.
Jacob, I feel like I'm learning so much, not just about life on the ranch, but about myself.
And about trust. Jacob nodded, understanding the weight of her words. Trust is earned, Clara, and you've earned mine every day in the way you work, the way you care, and the way you face challenges. Clara smiled, a mixture of relief and affection in her expression. She realized that their connection had become something neither of them had expected, a partnership that was grounded in responsibility, strengthened by shared effort, and deepened by genuine care. The weeks that followed were filled with more small victories, both practical and emotional. They managed the ranch together, navigated minor setbacks, and supported one another in ways that were quiet but meaningful. Each day brought new opportunities to learn, to grow, and to strengthen the bond that had formed between them. By the end of Part 3, Jacob and Clara had moved from a relationship defined by obligation to one defined by trust, understanding, and the beginnings of love. They had faced challenges together, shared responsibilities, and discovered that partnership was about more than duty. It was about connection, care, and shared life. And as they looked toward the future, both felt a quiet anticipation for what was to come, knowing that their journey together had only just begun. Life on the ranch had settled into a rhythm, but it was a rhythm that had changed. The quiet mornings, the long days of work, and the evenings spent under the stars now held a different kind of meaning. Jacob and Clara had moved past the early stages of obligation and uncertainty. What had begun as a duty had grown into something far more profound. There was trust, mutual respect, and the beginnings of love, steady and unspoken, yet undeniable. Clara had grown into the role she had once been unsure of. She moved through the ranch with confidence now, tending to the animals, working in the garden, and learning the intricate details of managing the land base. Her hands were no longer tentative. They were capable and sure. She took pride in the small successes, training a stubborn horse, harvesting a particularly fruitful patch of vegetables, or mending a fence without assistance. Jacob watched her quietly during these moments, sometimes helping, sometimes simply observing. And he felt a swelling admiration. Jacob himself had changed, though in subtler ways. He was still the hard-working, steady man the town knew, but now he carried a quiet contentment. The days were still long and the work still demanding, but there was a joy in sharing his life with Clara. He had always been self-reliant, used to facing challenges alone, but now he appreciated the partnership they had formed. There was comfort in knowing that he was not just a solitary figure managing a ranch, but a companion building a life alongside someone he cared for deeply. Even the animals seemed to respond to the change. Horses that had once been skittish moved more confidently around Clara. The dogs lingered near her side, and the cows seemed calmer when she was present. It was as if life on the ranch had grown fuller, richer, because she was a part of it. And Jacob, though he never spoke of it aloud, knew that the warmth he felt when he saw her laughing in the sun or carefully tending a task was something he had not experienced before. Despite the calm that had settled over their lives, challenges still appeared. One summer, a dry spell threatened the crops. The soil cracked, and the water supply ran dangerously low. Jacob and Clara worked tirelessly to ration water, care for the livestock, and save what they could of the harvest. It was exhausting, physically and mentally, but they faced it together. There were moments of frustration, moments when the heat and pressure tested their patience, but they supported each other, shared the load, and found solutions together. During those long, hot days, Clara realized something important. She had grown not just in skill and confidence, but in trust. She trusted Jacob's judgment, his strength, and his unwavering care, and she began to understand her own feelings, which went beyond gratitude and admiration. She felt warmth and safety in his presence, a quiet joy in their shared efforts, and a deepening affection that was impossible to ignore. Jacob noticed the change in her as well. He saw the way her eyes would meet his when she had a question, the subtle smiles that came without reason, and the moments of vulnerability she shared only with him. He felt a protective instinct, but it was coupled with a growing love that was patient, quiet, and certain. He had not set out to fall in love, but the feelings had grown naturally, nurtured by trust, respect, and shared life. One evening after a long day in the fields, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills. The sky was painted with orange and pink hues, and the air carried the scent of fresh earth and flowers. Clara turned to Jacob, hesitating for a moment before speaking. "Jacob, I never thought life could be like this," she said softly. "I mean, I never imagined that things could feel so steady, safe, happy." Jacob looked at her, his eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "It hasn't been easy, Clara," he said. "We've faced storms, setbacks, and hard work. But we've done it together. That's what matters." Psh. She smiled, a mix of relief and affection shining in her eyes. "I know, and I'm grateful. Not just for what you've done for me, but for being here, for being steady, for caring." Jacob reached out, taking her hand gently in his. "I care because it matters. You matter. And I'm glad you're here, Clara. Buff. Not just on the ranch, but here with me." Her cheeks flushed slightly, and she squeezed his hand. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a recognition that their bond had grown beyond responsibility, beyond duty, and had become something enduring and real. The seasons continued to change, and with them came new challenges and joys. Fall brought harvests, crisp air, and long evenings filled with warmth from the hearth. Jacob and Clara worked side by side, sharing meals, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. Winter brought snow, demanding care for the animals and the property, and again they faced the work together, finding comfort in their partnership. Each season strengthened their connection, building a life rooted in shared experience, trust, and love. The townspeople began to see the couple in a new light. Gossip faded, replaced by admiration for their hard work, mutual respect, and the genuine affection that was now apparent. Clara, once uncertain and timid, had grown into her role on the ranch, earning the respect of neighbors and community members. Jacob, always steady and reliable, was seen not just as a man of integrity, but as someone who had nurtured and supported a life alongside another. Together they were admired as a partnership built on dedication, honesty, and quiet love. One spring morning, a small crisis arose. A young foal had become trapped in a fence, struggling and panicked. Clara rushed to help, but Jacob arrived just in time to assist her in freeing the animal safely. Their coordinated effort, calm under pressure, reflected the deep understanding they had developed. After the foal was safe, they sat together, catching their breath, and Clara looked at Jacob with a smile.
"You always know what to do," she said, admiration clear in her voice.
Jacob chuckled softly. No, we always know what to do. Together. Her smile widened, and for a moment, the simple truth of their partnership was clear. They were not just individuals living side by side. They were a team, a family, and a bond that had grown stronger with every shared challenge and success. As time passed, their love deepened in quiet, steady ways. There were no dramatic declarations or grand gestures, only the consistent everyday actions that showed care, respect, and devotion. Great. Jacob learned to notice the small details, the way Clara prepared meals, the way she laughed when something went wrong, the quiet determination in her eyes. Clara learned to trust, to depend, and to appreciate the steady strength that Jacob brought to every moment. One summer evening, as fireflies danced in the fields and the air was warm with the fading heat of the day, Jacob and Clara walked hand in hand through the ranch. They stopped by the barn, watching the animals settle for the night. Jacob turned to Clara, a gentle smile on his face. You know, he said quietly, when I first stepped in to help your family, I didn't know what would come of it. I only knew it was the right thing to do. Breaths, heart full. I know. And now, look at us. We've built something together. Birth. Something good. Jacob nodded, his gaze steady and thoughtful.
Yes!
Something good. And I don't want it to ever end. Brand. Clara smiled, feeling a warmth she had never known. It won't.
We'll keep building, together. And so life continued.
The ranch flourished under their care. The animals thrived and the land yielded its bounty. Jacob and Clara faced difficulties, yes, but they did so as a united front, supporting each other with patience, understanding, and quiet devotion. Their relationship had grown from obligation to trust, from trust to affection, and from affection to a deep, enduring love that needed no words to define it. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sun set over the hills, speaking softly about the day, or sometimes simply sitting in comfortable silence. Her bag. The stars would emerge, one by one painting the sky with a calm brilliance, and they would share a sense of peace that came from knowing they had built something lasting. Rake. Clara often thought back to that moment when she had first said the words, "You paid for me, now finish it." At the time it had been a plea, a request for help in a moment of uncertainty, but Jacob had done more than finish what was expected. He had nurtured, guided, supported, and, in quiet ways, built a life with her. What had started as duty had blossomed into love, a love that was steady, real, and enduring. Jacob, too, reflected on that moment. He had acted out of a sense of responsibility, but over time he had discovered something unexpected, a partnership, a friendship, and finally, a love that had grown naturally from shared experiences, respect, and care. He knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but he also knew that with Clara by his side, there was no obstacle they could not face. By the end of Part 4, their story had reached a satisfying conclusion. The young woman who once faced uncertainty and fear now had a home, a family, and a partner who cared deeply for her. The man who had acted out of duty had found a companion, a friend, and a love that enriched his life beyond what he had imagined. Together, Jacob and Clara had built a life filled with trust, shared purpose, and enduring affection, a life that reflected the strength of their character and the depth of their bond. As the night fell softly over the ranch, Jacob and Clara sat together on the porch, hands intertwined, hearts content, and eyes lifted to the stars. The journey that had begun with a simple act of responsibility had transformed into a partnership of love, respect, and shared life. But in that quiet, peaceful moment, they both knew that they had found something rare and beautiful. A love that was steady, true, and enduring.